Hi, everyone. I am going to be reading the chat on Adobe Live and on Behance. So say hello there on the chat. Hi, my name is Cyn Lagos. I am going to be exploring Photoshop today, specifically the beautiful new developments of all of these wonderful tools, AI generated tools. Hi, Oliver. Hi, Sarb. Hi, Alessandra. I am reading the Behance chat right now. Thank you so much for joining me live. Before we get started, I'm going to introduce myself a little bit. For those of you who may not follow my work, I welcome you to peruse my website. I find it to be the easiest way to get to know me a little bit. So in these examples, you can see some of the work that I've done in the past here on the Adobe Live community and also on various different platforms of education. And I find it to be a very beautiful time for me to be able to give back because a lot of my education stemmed from on this beautiful interwebs that we have here. Online resources are so wonderful and it's all about dedication. And I know y'all are very dedicated because I've seen some familiar faces here time and time again. So I welcome you to definitely check out my website to learn a little bit more about the different examples that I have done in the past. Let me just show you that here. I have done a lot of different works exploring different mediums. I do not find myself exclusively attached to one. I think the overall exposure of learning about different storytelling mediums, I think is a vital part of my understanding of how to communicate visually. And so that in turn results in these beautiful experimentations where I find myself using different mediums to transform my visuals, to explore new ways to tell stories, to explore new ways to express myself. And I think that's ultimately the goal, right? To find a new way to express ourselves. And there's no lack of really cool tools that we have available to us online and in this beautiful ecosystem of Adobe. So this is our first new episode called Transformation Mondays with me as your host. And hopefully you get to enjoy and have a very inspiring next hour as we explore generative fill and neural filters in Photoshop. So let's get started and jump into Photoshop. I'm in Photoshop beta, so jump on in. Awesome. Thanks, Voodoo Val, for putting those helpful links there on Behance. And hi, everyone on YouTube also. I don't want to forget about y'all because I often join from YouTube too, so I get it. So I have this image here, and I want to talk a little bit about my exploration of generative fill since its launch, which has been a wonderful time of just magical turnouts from this design community. I've seen some cool experimentations. So for me personally, I found myself searching the archives and questioning sort of what I can do with previous images that maybe I wanted to modify, but the tools weren't quite available for me to do that. And this specific example, I wanted to explore expanding my image horizontally. And maybe you've seen a little bit of this. But the reason why this one is so particularly valuable for me as a photographer is that during the time that I took this photo, it was very king to photograph vertically because we output for social networks, which are experienced vertically. However, that can be a little bit of a downside whenever I wanted to showcase my work on my website. As you see, it's a horizontal space, right? So I found it really important to be able to explore some of my archive images and try to expand them. So the way I approach it is I'm going to hit this crop tool and I can set a ratio value here, and I have it at 5:7 at the moment. So that looks good. All right, so I hit OK, and I have my base layer here. So it's really important to note that I don't want my image, my original image, to be disrupted. And so we're gonna work non-destructively throughout this entire thing. So I'm going to be selecting the right-hand side, well, the left-hand side of my image first. I think it's gonna be a little bit easier here to expand this side. So you notice that I'm picking a few of the pixels of that image as well. So that's important because we want the generative fill to have a bit of context, to consider those pixels as it's generating something new. So the clue's in the name, generative fill, right? We're gonna fill those areas with pixels. So I'm gonna click my contextual bar here. You can find it in two places. You can find it here, and you can find it in your properties panel also. But the contextual bar is very helpful. In case you need it, you can find it here, contextual bar in the Windows. I think, yeah, I have it checked on already, but that's where you will find it if you can't see it. All right, so let's enter a prompt. Just kidding. You don't have to enter a prompt at all in this case. You just hit generate. And that little sliver of pixels that we added there on the edge is actually going to help us, or help the Adobe Firefly powered AI to be well informed as it's generating these pixels in context. So that's really, really important. It's a pro tip to consider. I know we're so used to selecting everything outside. I know we're so used to being very picky with our selections. It feels counterintuitive. It's like a body feeling. I totally get that. But we're gonna be doing this quite often in this process. So the reason why I only selected the left-hand side is important. You can see here, this right-hand side has a bit of an edge to it that is going to give a different context. So it might result in different outputs. I know this right away because it's going to take it into context, right? So I want to do those separately. Right now, I have this layer outputted with that result and 3 different options for me to explore. All right, I think I like the first one, and it's something I can always go back to. Okay, so I'm going to select there. So Sean says, I'm trying to figure out what the future is for me as well as my community. Isn't that like such an interesting, we're in a fork in the road. I know that feeling. Yeah, it's something worthy of contemplating, especially as we find ourselves being given so many tools to play with. All right, let's hit generative fill here. And I'm also just gonna hit generate. I'm not going to add any specific prompt. We'll talk a little bit more about prompt generation. There's a bit of a learning curve there, not a steep one. But if you wanna get better at it, yes, there's some things that could help you improve your selection process, your generating process. Awesome. Pedro Mendoza, hi. I see some folks there on YouTube too. Christopher, hi. All right, so let's see here. Look at this interesting result. So I find this really, really peculiar because it had that little sliver there at the very bottom. It was able to contextualize the fact that there is a bit of a sphere going on. And I find this to be kind of cool. A different result every single time. I have not seen these results. In fact, this is as live as can be because with generated fill, each result is absolutely unique. So you and I are experiencing this at the same time. I've never seen this before. So that's kind of peculiar, right? It's going to be giving like similar results depending on the prompt, but it's always very unique. Very important to know in case you want to save your file before you start all over because you might not get the same exact thing. So as you notice, we have now 2 separate files. We have this side and we have this side. And I find that to be helpful because if I generated them both together, now they're both existing in the same file. And that can be a little bit harder to modify. Now, let's say I didn't really like that it did this. Maybe I wanted this entire thing to be the sky, right? I can actually continue, the fun doesn't stop there. I can actually continue to modify this. So this is the artist element of it all, right? So we're gonna go in here and duplicate this layer. Command J. And we're gonna transform it. We're gonna move it over to the right-hand side. Press enter. I'm gonna bring it to the back, to the front. Command T, and we're going to transform this and flip it horizontally. And bring it over here. So now that still doesn't match. You can see that here on the edges, that doesn't quite look good, right? So I'm gonna undo the generative fill we had at the bottom here. And what I'm gonna do now that I have this layer selected is pick the lasso tool and select this particular area. I'm using a mouse here, so it's not perfect, but we don't have to be precious about it, which is the great thing about it. So let's say I select some of these around there. That's looking good. Great. All right, so now we can hit Generative Fill and just hit Generate. So hopefully in this, by selecting this area, we're gonna be able to mesh those two layers. Fingers crossed, because it's always a different result, like I said. So already you can start to see how those are meshed together. It's not quite perfect in the beginning, so you have to see the different options that you have available to you. I didn't give it too many clues. I didn't say, hey, remove this. But what I do find is that when you don't include a prompt, it immediately knows you're attempting to fill that area with contextual space. So I am getting to do that. I'm going to generate one more time just to see what happens as a result. I think every single time you get to have a different option, and you can mitigate the ones that don't work as well, and you find yourself kind of finding the best one to work with. Think of it as a base foundation more so than an end result. So in this case, I think it's considering it as, I want that line there. So I'm going to delete these results. If you delete those results, it's going to understand. Well, I've found that it understands. I'm not sure if it's quite baked into it, but it's part of the evolution of a generative fill. It begins to understand that maybe some of these didn't work out. So maybe in the next generation of this imagery, it's not going to use those as clues. So I'll delete all the ones that didn't quite work and hit generate one more time there. I can see a few folks on the chat having full conversations. I love this. Harsh Raj says, sorry if I destroyed your name there, but says, am I late to the party? You're not quite late. We're covering quite a lot today, so we're going to get to do a few things here. Cool. So I feel like that is potentially one of the best ones, and you can always modify it. But already we started from this file here, which was taken by my camera with me, of course, vertically, right? So I don't have any resources for that horizontal space. But with Generative Fill, I was able to fill it and create this wonderful new horizontal version of my scene. So I'm gonna hit Shift Alt Command E just to unite this and create a different scene. Now, I don't often bake everything right away, but just for the sake of presentation, I will be doing this for now. So let's go to filter and go into neural filters. All right, so all of this takes quite a bit to be considered. So we'll be chatting along the way. But when it comes to neural filters, there's a lot of different things that are being developed, and there are also a few of them that are in beta format. So providing feedback and things of that nature are really helpful. Let's see. Oh, I think I clicked the wrong neural filters. That's a past neural filter there. So go to this one right here. So I clicked this one right here, which is my previous effect. So I'm going to actually go into the library. I was surprised it took so long. All right. So let's go into this particular one called Landscape Mixer. I had to do the p there. All right. So I'm going to go in here. And you can see we have a few options here. So Landscape Mixer is specifically for landscape imagery. So you want to consider that before you start playing with it, because I've gotten some wonky results when I attempt to get these views on something that on an image that isn't a landscape image. So this has plenty of landscape going on. So let's hope that that should be able to read it as such. Let's turn it on here. That little button is important. And it's going to tell me here that's processing on device. And we have a couple options here to consider. The strength, the time of day, night, sunset. It's kind of wild to think that you can modify anything like that. Spring, summer, autumn, and winter. And so in this case, it emulated the sample color palette, the sample imagery that I selected at full strength at 100. Voodoo Val says the P sounds makes it pop. I hope the images make it pop too, okay? But yes, absolutely. So I am going to modify this quite a bit just to get something that works for me, right? So already we went from this beautiful baby blue sky to this kind of like fuchsia sunset imagery. Now, some things are not exactly as I want them to be, so I'm going to modify it just a little bit. I want the sunset to be a little bit more, so I'll dial that in. And every time it is going to be processing, so I try to be very considerate of how many things I move in my selections. So I want you to think about a few things as we're making these selections that I find that are very important. As I said before, we don't want to work destructively, which means that we can't make any edits in the future. Currently, I am editing this image specifically on the image, on that layer that we selected. That means it's all baked in. But under here, we have a few options. We can select it to be a new layer output. We can also select it to be a new layer mask. So it's going to have a mask on the side in case you want to modify, add a little bit of pink on one side, but not another. And then we have smart filter. So I'm going to select new layer for now, just so you can see what I mean. When I do that, I'm going to click OK. And this is going to be now a brand new layer. So now that's important because I can't quite edit this new layer, but at least I still have my previous artwork. And it's not going to be destroyed, essentially, by me creating this edit that can no longer be modifiable. However, this file in itself, there's not much I can do here. Potentially, I could add a mask of my own, maybe a negative mask, and decide which areas I want to bring in that hue, right? Maybe I want it at the top. It's one of those yin-yang moments where this side is facing a different time of day, a different world, potentially. I mean, so I think in my exploration of generative fill, AI within my photography, a question that I found myself asking that I want you to consider too is, what type of photography are you trying to express? If you're doing something like photojournalism, something like this might feel not genuine to your work, right? Because it's not specifically that location, it's not specifically those clouds potentially, right? However, if you're a concept artist, somebody hoping to build a composite for a work that involves a level of fantasy, a level of imagination, I think this is a good space to introduce your photography as a foundation and then develop your work as you go along and just layer on your imagination as you go. And I think that is a very peculiar question that I find myself asking just to understand how this fits in within my workflow as a photographer. And during my evolution as a photographer, right? We're learning, we're growing, and we're evolving along the way. So let's say, for example, I did the same thing, but I wanted to go into newer filters one more time here. I want to, instead of outputting into a new layer, I want to output as a smart filter. So let's do that same effect, let it run for a little bit so that it makes it happen, and make sure to select a smart filter. So that's going to be really important. Reverb says the yin, the yang, and the bang bang. Yep, that's our slogan for today. Nice one. So I'm going to select OK here now that it's completed, and notice that I included that smart filter. And so that's going to be really, really valuable, because if I come back to this artwork, if I'm part of a team and I'm creating maybe a poster, which involves this photograph, I may have folks with edits, right? We might have edits along the way, and that may mean someone that might want a different color palette, a different visual. So we want to be able to revisit this and edit it as we work along our project. So we can do that here because we have in our layer a smart filter, which means we can always edit it again and again and again and again. So that's really, really important. I would hate to be in a place where I have to say, no, I'm sorry, I can't do that anymore. We're too far off. And I know that happens. It's part of the process. I'm sure they're going to be understanding, but it's helpful to keep that in mind as you're working in your projects, especially if you're part of a team, to have consideration of how can I modify this in the future, and can I, or is it all baked in? So that's a good consideration as a professional to have. Okay, so I like the way this turned out. I think that was really, really cool. I think we can move on to our next image. We have some time here. You're awesome. And I'm not going to hit save because it will take up too much time. Do not kill me for that. Okay, I have a reason. Okay, so let's move on to a different image here. So I have this image that, again, I took vertically because it was an era for me to take vertical photos. I found it as a personal challenge, quite frankly. This image, for example, has a really wonderful aspect ratios. It has a 9:16 aspect ratio, and particularly I used it with a very strong scale technique where I love making the person or the subject matter very, very tiny, and then the second subject matter also as important by kind of allowing it to take up a lot of the space. So in this case, it's the ocean, and you can see it's almost 95% of this image, which is wonderful. I love it as it is, but for the sake of this, I think we're going to experiment a little bit with this ocean and see what we can find. So with Generative Fill, you can add new pixels, right? We can expand our image in photography. Cool, we've learned that one. Now I want to explore what it would be like if I want to add elements to my image. So I may want to add something here. For example, let's add a sailboat, right? So I want you to consider a pro tip here is when I am making a selection, the size of my selection matters. The shape of the selection matters too, I notice. So I might want to make a selection like this, and you'll notice when I write the word sailboat and hit generate, that particular space that we've selected is going to be filled in. So that was something I ran into because I would ask in the prompt, I want a big fish. I wrote the word big, but it wasn't as responsive to that. And I noticed that the way to approach that is to create a big selection and forego the word big altogether. So worry about nouns and adjectives, great, but you don't have to create those instructive words within your prompt. It's not really that necessary. So we got ourselves a boat that looks completely out of proportion because I made that selection far too big. But it's rather interesting, right? How it's able to nevertheless blend it within the waves that we have there. And now you're probably asking yourself, where is this boat coming from? You know, it didn't come from my imagination. It didn't come from my own photography. Well, this is all ethically sourced from Adobe stock, a bunch of images licensed in Adobe stock. And I think that's the grand differentiator here. In the name of the game that is AI, I think responsibility is a big part of it. And I'm really, really glad that I can sit here and create work that I know is potentially benefiting an artist. Somewhere is going to credit the artist as I complete my work. And that in itself, I think it's a nice feeling because we're all artists here. We're all trying to make a little piece of visual into this world, and we want to make sure it's not taken advantage of. And so we have these boats that potentially live somewhere in Adobe stock, and it's being constructed within the context of this imagery. Now, this boat is far too big, and that's okay. That was my fault because I intentionally made a big selection for demonstration purposes. So I'm just going to remove that, and instead maybe I make a boat here, and I'll make it a little bit smaller because I think when I study my image, my subject matter, the people, are a great signifier of to the viewer of the scale, right? We all know the size of a quarter. We all know the size of a person approximately. So it gives us a sensibility of how big this ocean is. But it also is important for when we want to add elements. We have to think, well, the boat can't be that big, not a sailboat, unless it's a cruise ship. So let's try again and do another sailboat. I wrote sailbot. All right, sailboats. Let's see how we're doing here. Yeah, Voodooval says the ethical nature of Adobe Firefly and Generative Fill means so much to me. Yeah, and I think a big part of this has been influenced by us creators, those of us who were concerned throughout the entire process of this development and also give feedback. So there are developers in the back end listening. So definitely give feedback whenever you see those little tabs that says, is this a good result? Is this a bad result? No matter what you put, it's always going to be great feedback to developing the next version of Generative Fill, of all of these wonderful tools. So you might make an influence in that end, right? That's pretty cool. All right, so I have a sailboat here, which is, gosh, it's sinking, poor thing. This is a better sailboat, I think. Yeah, I think this one's a lot better. And obviously, if we don't like that result, there it is. That's the thing I was talking about. We can always write, including here. You know, this result was good. This was a good result. Yeah, I like it. But this one, I didn't like it. So I'm going to put poor result. I have not had to use report result, thankfully. But if you do find that to be important, you know, you gotta introduce that there because it's all wonderful feedback to be able to create a better tool for all of us to be able to use, right? So I have myself a boat there, and I think I might want to create something here. So I think this is a school of fish after some analysis. It looks like maybe there's some bubbles there. There might be some fish, some bait in the water. So maybe I can create, I don't want to create a shark because I do not believe in that idea that all sharks are bad. They're beautiful, beautiful creatures, and we're in their space. So I'm going to create a dolphin in this case. So I'm going to select that lasso tool and select this little space right here. And I'm going to add the word dolphin. And let's wait for that to generate. Reverb says a yacht. A yacht? Okay. I've created a yacht and a few of them. Actually, I'll show you an example later. And on socials, I've experimented quite a bit. And so there is our dolphin. I love how it took into account this idea, this sort of extra step of, well, it's not flying, it's potentially in the water. It has to be visible. So it has those different options as if it's actually within the water, which is so cool. And it's took in the tonality of my water here, which, by the way, this image has already been processed. So this image has color correction involved in it. And you can see here what this dolphin looks like, right? So that takes on all of that contextual pixels around it. So this also includes a mask, which you can continue to modify if you want to play with it. However, at the moment, if I want to reposition this dolphin, I can't just move it around because you can see there, it starts to look really wonky. So I'm better off selecting a new space and generating a new dolphin, or potentially moving this around and generating new pixels around this area, the outside area, so it blends, much like we did earlier in the previous one. I'm not going to spend too much time doing that. We're going to move on to some other images, but already we've created some really interesting additions to our photo. And now we have a boat, a school of fish, and a really, really cute dolphin in our image that wasn't there at all. Just so cool. So now we know we can extend our image, and we know we can generate new objects within our photography. So use that with the imagination that you want to create something new, maybe a new concept. Just conceptualizing an idea prior to could be very helpful. So you can go out there and photograph a scene as a set of more tools. Scene, really, really cool. We created this one too. And close it. By the way, I didn't get that boat before. This is a brand new sailboat specifically for Adobe Live. So don't save. It hurts every time I do that. All right, so let's see here, this image we have, this one here. So when it comes to Generative Fill, one of the wonderful things that it does is remove things that I don't want in my image. And I know we've been able to do that before. We have a lot of really cool tools that can do that, also powered by AI. And this one particularly, I find it to be really, really easy if I use Generative Fill, because I don't have to do each section. It's really up to you. I think any workflow works, but I'm just going to walk you through my analysis of this image. So for example, I love this image the way it stands. If I was to use it for photojournalism purposes, this is what it looked like. This is exactly what it was. If I want to use it as a photo composite for poster design, for something of that nature, maybe I want to use it in a background for packaging design. I'm thinking in terms of a graphic designer, all of these different ways that we utilize photography within graphic design to promote a brand, to develop a specific, advocate for a specific idea. So I might want to modify this to look like something else. So in this case, I want to be able to isolate this character here in the middle. And I want to be able to remove some of these folks here on the side, right? So I want to be able to isolate this one here. So I'm going to select the lasso tool. Now I can do this one by one. You can see this one particularly really close to the umbrella here. And I'm going to select all of them. Now, all of them have a different set of light conditions. You can already tell. I can already think about the problematic elements that can arise from not selecting this perfectly. Some areas are a little bit more shadowy. So this is me thinking in terms of tools that I've had to use in the past in order to make this step happen. And in this case, it's not as concerning, actually. It's going to be able to consider elements like that reflection there below this fella, that reflection, and I won't have to think it through and try to make it look like it matches. So I'm just gonna hit Generative Fill, and because we are removing elements, we don't have to add a prompt. So we can just hit generate without any prompt written, no adjectives, no nouns in this case. It's going to take that surrounding pixels, and that's why we didn't create a very precious selection. We also selected a little bit of the umbrella, in fact, just to make sure it keeps that into consideration. And you can see that it removed absolutely everything. It's so interesting. But nevertheless, say for example, I did want to bring back somebody here. I have a mask for each of these edits, which means I can also bring it back by just adding the opposite color here and displaying some of that area. I can tell I have something selected here. Okay. There you go. I think I have something else selected, and that's why that's happening. Barbara asked for a cruise boat. I'm sorry, we're past that photo, but I'll take requests next time. I'll be sure to think of that. All right, let's see here what is being selected, just to be sure I'm not in a different app. I think it's my... All right, we can forgo that particular edit, but essentially you bring back that black, that image using the mask and white reveals and black hides, which I think we're very familiar with masks, but in general, masks are one of my favorite ways to work non-destructively in any situation. But yeah, we have this new image here that derived specifically from just selecting the Generative Fill tool. Instead of stamping and editing out certain reflections that are here at the bottom or anything that is a little bit more precarious in terms of tonality, lighting, and things of that nature that I think can become a little bit tedious as you are playing with removing things and adding new pixels into an image, right? So maybe a new thing I can do here. Let's see if I can do it, and that might make this move. Oh, okay, so maybe I want to move this image here, change this image here into something different. So I'm going to hit Shift Command Alt E, Alt or Option. Okay, and I'm going to go into Edit and hit Sky Replacement. And sky replacement is another form of AI-driven tool where it's able to recognize the sky. You notice I did not select it. It was my intuition to make that selection. However, I actually did not have to do that at all. And I was able to just make this sky replacement in a single tool selection. Now we do have different skies here that we can help replace. I do think the first one was one of the most ideal, but wow, that's incredible that we can find ourselves in a whole new scene altogether, completely derived from post editing and designing a brand new scene. Oh, I love this one. I think this one I'm going to save, y'all. I think it's worthy. I think we're all worthy, but I'm just trying to show you as much as I can here. So, save. Awesome. Buduval says, if there's enough room for a boat, you could add a kraken instead. I actually had to draw Kraken in a brief when I first started graphic design. And I did not know the history behind it with, different brands and like all of them. There's a lot of beautiful illustrated Krakens out there. It was very intimidating. But yeah, maybe that's something we can create. All right, so let's move on to another scene here. Something here that I found really interesting is the power of generative fill to disseminate some of the reflections. And so I'm going to select the bottom area here of this image. I love this scene because it's so abstract. I love being able to see the silhouettes of a particular object. In this case, I consider this like a still subject imagery. It's just so particular of Miami, these Art Deco sort of shapes and color palettes, and that this particular time of day when the shadows are so sharp, they almost look like graphics of their own. So I'm going to select this bottom shape here just to inspire a new scene. And I'm going to hit Generative Fill and add the word reflection. Maybe I'll add the word ripple in the beginning too. So to add a little bit of style. And let's see what happens when we hit generate. Now, something to note is that you can also find the generative layer right here underneath properties, right? So you can see that it says here, describe what you like to generate. And this is in English currently. And you can see how it populates what I currently wrote. So you can always modify. You can continue to modify as you go. And you can see how the water was generated. But not only water, it was also taking into account the reflection of that palm tree leaf, which is so interesting. And I'm going to remove some of these here just to see what else I can generate if I write maybe the word water. It sort of understood that I wanted water based on this, but it could easily generate something different. I've had a few attempts where it generated a mirror or a reflective glass. So you might have to think about those nouns and be a bit more specific in that case. But look at this one, for example. One might think this is a bit interesting because it looks like maybe you're beside a pool, maybe this is by the ocean, or gosh, it's a hurricane or something. But it is so peculiar to me that you can actually see the reflection. I didn't say reflect the palm tree leaf. I didn't say reflect the shadows. That is all part of the context. Voodoo says, I like that second one. Yeah, I think the second one here, this one's nice. We have this one. And sometimes you can see oh wow, this one really has those ripples. That ripple request is really coming through. I love that one. It's by far my favorite. And I love that selection, for example, I could make a stripe selection, but it still has a little bit of shape here in my generated options. So let's save. Let's move on from this one because I think, yeah, that's all I wanted to do to this one. I'm gonna hit save for this one too because I like it. All right. Now we have all of these options here at a time. Something important to know is that at any time, whenever you click on this layer, you're going to be able to see what your prompt was. And I think that's important because I might forget what prompt generated that really cool effect. And having that working file means that I can always double click it, or actually you just have to click it once, and I can see that arrangement of words that generated that particular visual. And that's going to be important as you continue to learn how to get better at prompts. Okay, let's close this one out. And I think we might have time for one or two more. Gosh, let's see. Okay, so instances that I find let's continue with this water theme, right? So this is my friend Natasha Perez. Check her out. That's, I think, also her handle. Really cool experimentation where we just get together and create these photographs. This one particularly, we were headed somewhere else, and I love this garage. It's like parking garage, and nothing peculiar about it except the fact that there's these ridges and these color palettes, and there was other images that outputted a bit more of that color palette, but I was really intrigued by this angle and all of the leading lines on this surface. So I asked her to kind of lean over, and I liked this image, and for many years I kind of thought it was really nice. But I wonder what would happen if I start playing with my imagination and see what else we can create here. So I'm going to make a rough selection, but still a particular selection here because I'm selecting an angle, which I hope should be honored in my generation. So let's say my selection here, cool. And I'm going to generate water, blue water, maybe. Also reflective, all right, reflection. And maybe I'll add a specific word here. Let's add the word Greek. Let's see what happens, right? Now this is a pretty interesting, steep perspective. So I'm not really sure what I might get, but I can kind of see the image in my head, right? All right, so that one was no good. We can start to see a few different ones. Okay, Greek water reflection. What about Greek pool reflection? So you start to modify those options. This is a tricky one, and oftentimes I find myself wanting to just test it to the limit. Don't you ever want to do that? Just like almost break it to see how far can it go. And you can start to see here the influences of that word Greek with a few of the tiles and also some of the color palettes of that option. I like this one so far. And if I delete some of these, I think a hope I have in the future is that we can say, I want more of this one, and help the AI generate something very, very similar. So let's see what else it can create for me here. Yeah, I was wondering the same thing, Vudaval. Sometimes you can work directly from that one. That one's nice. That's a good option. I think this one's taking consideration. Maybe her legs are below there, which is a little bit odd. Let's make a final selection here on the back and see what happens. I'm using the pen tool in this case. I'm pretty fast with the pen tool. I'm using a mouse, which is not that peculiar at all. And I'm just gonna make a selection, but I still selected her hair there. I wasn't too precious, which is, again, it feels like counterintuitive, but it does help the generative fill keep in mind the context of those pixels, surrounding pixels. So I'll write the word palm tree, This was taken in Miami, Florida, so beautiful Caribbean energy all over. So hopefully it can create a bit of an ambience here. Gosh, I'm gambling with y'all, just seeing what happens. So we have that option. We have that option. Let's hit generate again and see what else we can get. But already, we're no longer in a parking garage, right? Like already this is looking vastly different from where we started. And wow, that's amazing. So there's a lot of perspective being taken into consideration here, which is so wild to think of how far our technology is coming to our hands, really, for us to experiment. So I want to be able to just say thank you for everyone who's been able to join me here today on episode 1, which is kind of amazing to think about. Let me see. I'm going to just share with you guys this final note right here. All right. So if you want to see some more of my experimentations, a really interesting one I made recently, I made it into a game. I think it's kind of cool. I wanted to explore creating something from scratch. So definitely give it a go and try to guess which of these images is the one that I made from scratch with Generative Fill, and which are the ones that I took with my camera. It's been really, really fun being here with y'all. This has been super cool. This is episode 1 of Transformation Mondays with me, Cyn Lagos. As always, y'all are the best on the chat. Thank you, Budval, for being here also, and I'll see you next time. See you on the next one.